Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here and welcome back to the railway. Today I'm looking at a brand new loco by Heljan. It's been a really long while since I last reviewed a Heljan loco, let alone a brand new tooled Heljan loco. But just this week they did release a brand new engine, so I've picked one up and we're going to take a look. So the new loco is this. It is the British Rail Class 02 Shunter. This is a model that was announced absolutely ages ago, so it's almost quite surreal that this thing has finally arrived. Now, we all know what I thought of previous Heljan locomotives, but as I always say, every model deserves a fair review. So for today, we're going to wipe the slate clean, forget everything that I know about Heljan in the past, and I'm going to evaluate this model based on this model alone. So with that, let's start by talking about the price. So the full RRP for this model is £169. That's for the DCC ready version. And with the retailer discount, this works out at £143.65. Now, I have thoughts on that price, I do, but I'm not going to cry it's too expensive before I've seen the model, but what I will say is that that price seems quite a bit higher than other 040 diesel shunters on the market. And there's not very many of them, actually. I've been looking to try and compare this against them. Yeah, there's only a couple of current ones that I can think of. So we've got the Hornby Ruston 88DS. That has an RRP of £124.99, so Heljan's 02 is 35% more than that. The other one is also by Hornby, it's the Sentinel 040, a very complex model in its detail, this one, but it's even cheaper at £119.99, making the Heljan 02 40% more than that. So I would expect to get quite a lot more for my money with this loco in terms of hopefully production quality, features, details, that sort of thing. So high expectations for this model. Hopefully this is going to meet them. And if you'd like to try one of these locos as well, I do have affiliate links in the description. There's all sorts of different versions available, including one that's called Sam. And you might have expected me to pick that one up, but I just didn't like the colour of it. Yeah, it's kind of a sickly looking green. I just couldn't bring myself to drop nearly £150 for that one. Maybe that was stupid, maybe that's a mistake, but I've gone for once for a relatively normal livery, BR green this time. But anyway, you'll see all that. Let's get started, let's see what this is like. So as you can see, a really tiny little box for this loco, because of course the engine itself is pretty tiny. Great little box design as well, line drawing of the loco on the front, so that's pretty good. I'm also wondering why we've got a builder's plate on the front there. Is that teasing us that there's going to be etched builder's plates inside? That's the kind of feature I'm hoping to see on this model if it's going to be considered worth the money. For me, this has to be a big step up from the likes of the Hornby Rustons and the Sentinels. But anyway, we shall see. Let me show you the end of the box. So the one I've gone for is 2840. It's in the BR green, it's the Class 02, and it's D2861 with the red buffer beam. There's also a very similar one with a yellow buffer beam. Anyway, we've got some specs on here. It's DCC ready with an X18 DCC socket. It does have working lights. That is something that Hornby's Ruston and Hornby's Sentinel did not have, so that's cool. Interior lights as well, so presumably some sort of cab light. Again, Hornby's 040 diesel shunters didn't have that. NEM couplers, fairly standard. Sound ready, so pre-fitted speaker then, I guess. And it's era 5 and 6. So yeah, from the box, we've got hints and the promise of some pretty cool features. Yeah, it sounds as though then that this is going to be a pretty high spec model, but is it? Let's lift the lid and take a look. All right. Oh, I was going to say, almost missed those. Instructions stuck in the box. Let's take a look at this then. So, Yorkshire Engine Company, BR Class 02, 040, and it's a diesel hydraulic. User manual. Okay. Oh, this is weird. Right, so locomotive history. We've got a decent couple of paragraphs here. So pause and read that if you're interested in the background. Okay, straight into removing the body then. So for this you have to remove 2 screws on the underside of the chassis below the cab. Step 2, here we go, Heljan. Remove the headlamp part on top of the radiator. Okay, fair enough, revealing a small screw. So, yep, hidden screws. Loosen the screw and store it and the headlamp part in a safe place. Carefully lift away the bonnet. Okay. And there we have the insides, so that's when you can chip the locomotive. O2 light functions, here we go. So it's fitted with separately controlled marker lights and cab interior light functions. In DC and DCC mode, the cab lights can be switched on and off using the magnetic wand supplied. That is awesome. So yes, this really does sound like it's going to be high spec. DCC sound installation. Yes, the model does have a factory fitted speaker housed under the cab control desk. Oh, that's cool. So for a small engine, it's got quite a lot. It's got the lights, it's got the control system for the lights so that you can magnetically operate it, and it's got a speaker pre-fitted, presumably still with room for a DCC socket as well. That's not bad. Then additional parts, the Class O2 is supplied with a small pack of optional detailing parts. Okay, that's very basic. It's just the couplings and sort of blanking plugs that you can insert in place of the couplings so that the loco looks realistic without them. And then on the back, so this is the O2's technical data. Let's have a look at this. Cordless motor with a flywheel. I think that's a good choice. Wiper pickups on all wheels. I don't think there's anything else that we've not touched on already. Bit of basic information here, mainly telling us that the loco needs to be running, which I will do. And then here we have exploded diagrams. Very nice. So body at the top, quite a few different separate details on this body. That looks pretty good. Here's the chassis on the inside. We can see we've got some cab interior detail there. Whoa, that's caught my eye. And then we've got the PCB there. Says ESU loco sound decoder, not included. What's including? I'd be interested to know. And then underneath you can see how the base is fitted on, and we've got a big parts list over on the right here. So do you know what? Apart from the spelling of included, it looks as though these instructions are pretty competent. Most of the spelling was right, and the information was actually useful, and hopefully, as we look at the loco, turns out to be correct this time. But yeah, good instructions, they cover all bases. But with that, let's take a look at the engine. So hopefully it's under here. It's very, very well shrouded by the packaging. But yeah, as you can see, quite a small loco, not quite as small as the Ruston 88. So it'll be interesting to see how it compares on weight. Obviously, there's a lot of features packed into this thing. So has there been space to make this decently heavy? Well, we'll see. Right. So the first thing is tapes down. It's fairly obvious what this is. So that is the little plastic wand with the magnet built into the end of it, which you can use to operate the lights. I really like that feature because, of course, you don't really want cab lights on all the time, but it's nice to have the option if that's what you want. Pop that back down. Okay, accessories then. So we've got quite a bit more than the instructions suggested. Mainly, we have got some sort of etched plate here. We've got a Yorkshire plate and some sort of very tiny logo. So that's really cool. No builder's plate that I can see, but yeah, we do have etched plates, so that's decent. We've got NEM pockets, as you can see here, with the couplings pre-fitted. So if you don't want the couplings, you have to remove the pockets as well. And then I'm guessing these red things, these are the little blanking plugs that you can put into the red buffer beams instead of the NEMs. And then we've got some coupling hooks with metal chain link couplings pre-fitted onto them. So you can fit those to the buffer beams too. So yeah, that's really, really good to see. That all checks out. Again, all suggesting this is going to be a high spec model. But what's the loco like? Let's see. Opening. Hopefully we'll get a first look at the finish. Here we go. Removing plastic, or attempting to. All right. Okay. That is a fair finish. Yep, that's not too plasticky looking. It's got a fair bit of shine I'm noticing on the bonnet and the roof. Yeah, that looks, on first glance, like a decent paint job. But what's the weight like? Lifting up? Yeah, it's all right. Yeah, it's all right. I would say, given all the tech that this loco's got inside it, the weight here is generally pretty decent. And I guess you'd call it the running plate, this section at the bottom, this is die cast, it's made of metal. So yeah, I would say, yeah, decent weight on this. Also, the paintwork and the level of detail looks fantastic as well. Yeah, this looks like a very nicely detailed model, as well it should, of course. But anyway, we'll take a much closer look at the build quality and the details and the features in just a second. But first, let's have a bit of background on the Class 02 in real life. 20 British Rail Class 02 shunters were built between 1961 and 1962 by the Yorkshire Engine Company. Their tiny size and short 040 wheelbase made them ideal for work on docks or other areas with restricted loading gauges and tight radius curves. Members of this class were built with 170 horsepower Rolls-Royce engines, and they weighed in at a mere 29 tonnes. Nevertheless, they produced a respectable tractive effort of around 67 kilonewtons. The Class 02s would have unusually short working lives though. The role of British Railways changed significantly around the end of the 60s, and many of the facilities where these engines worked were closed down, leaving the 02s surplus to requirements. Withdrawal of the class began in 1969, and by 1975 none were left in service. That's not dreadfully long after they were introduced. More positively though, a healthy 7 examples remain today under preservation, while sadly the remainder were scrapped. Now this example, number D2861, was not one of the lucky ones, and she was cut up in around 1969 to 1970. So there it is, up close and personal for you, Heljan's brand new BR Class 02 shunter. And for me this is a bit of a mixed bag. The level of detail and features I would say is very impressive, and they really do help to justify the high price of this model. The downside though is the quality. Now it's nowhere near as bad as we've seen on the past. Heljan's Ruston 165, that was a travesty and should never have been released in that state. This is nowhere near as bad as that, but there are 1 or 2 issues which for me do kind of spoil the model a little bit. And the really unfortunate part about all of this is that many of the issues are issues that I've identified before with Heljan models, issues that I've spoken about at great length in my reviews. And therefore, realistically, if Heljan had their ear to the ground, they should have been aware of some of these issues and they should have been able to improve them, and yet we're not seeing those improvements in many areas. So anyway, let's jump into this. First of all, the loco is not as heavy as you might think. Obviously, it's a very big, chunky looking loco, but it only weighs in at 120 grams, which quite surprisingly makes this loco lighter than Hornby's Ruston 88DS. And as you can see, the Ruston is a much sort of slimmer looking loco, so you wouldn't expect the Ruston to be the heaviest of the two, but it is by about 6 grams. So perhaps a little bit more metal in the bodywork would have boosted the weight. That would have been nice, but I have to say I'm extremely glad Heljan didn't make the body out of metal on this model, which is not something I say very often, but the reason I say it here is because the quality of the die casting is absolutely abysmal. Yeah, we've seen this before with Heljan's 1361. I'm sure there was another loco that had this problem as well. But yeah, the quality of Heljan's die casting is just not up to scratch. As you can see, the surface is pitted. The top section here is all dented. The moulding is just in no way smooth. It looks dreadful. There's paint chipped off it on the other side. Yeah, thank goodness more of this model is not die cast. And honestly, a part that looks like this on a model that costs over £140 is insanely bad. So why they've not made improvements to their die casting, I couldn't say. Now, ironically, one area that has improved is the fitment of the smaller details. So the smaller parts are absolutely fine. We've got the wipers, which are actually touching the windows. Most of the handrails are nice and straightly applied. But it's some of the larger components which are not correctly fitted or not correctly designed, I'm not sure which. But as you can see, if I hold my ruler up to the buffer beams, you can see these are not fitted straight. And from what I can tell from the drawings and the photos of the real thing, this is not a prototypical thing. And let me hold it up against the rear buffer beam, which, yeah, is not straight. Not straight. And that is really annoying to see, actually. It's something that I can't really unsee. So yeah, there's that. Not quite acceptable, is it? We've got buffers which are loose. I noticed this one's kind of wobbly, so that's not brilliant. And then we've got this handrail around the back. To be fair, most of the handrails are made of metal and nice and sturdy, but presumably because of its complexity, this one on the back is just molded plastic, and yeah, it's just not sturdy enough. As you can see, it wobbles all over the place, and even when I'm not wobbling it, you can see it's not sitting straight. There's a noticeable kink in some of the plastic here, so really, I think for the price, this needed to be an etched part and fitted straightly so that it looks half decent. There's also a few issues with the decoration, but for whatever reason, Heljan haven't improved them. So the quality of the BR crest is not brilliant. It might look okay in isolation like this, but if I bring in a Bachmann locomotive with this crest, hopefully you can see how much better that looks. Again, for a cheap budget model, this would be more than okay, but on the most expensive 040 diesel shunter I've ever purchased in 00 scale, I would expect better than that. We've also got some of the blackening coming off some of the wheels. Not brilliant. These wheels should have either been touched up or rejected. While we did have some etched plates in the accessories bag, there is no printed version on the model, which A, makes the model look a bit incomplete right out of the box for those who want a truly ready-to-run model, and B, it makes placing the etched one that little bit more tricky because you'll have to research and figure out the exact placement of those plates for yourself, which is not great. So for such a tiny model, I would say there's a surprising number of issues here, especially given what it cost. So that is disappointing. Less disappointing though is the model itself and, like I say, the level of detail. So let's talk about the decoration then. The finish, I would say, is absolutely fine. That looks good. And one thing that has been done very, very well is the wasp striping. This is very nice and crisp, some of the best I've seen. Not sure how they're able to do this so well and then produce such a bad looking BR crest. I suppose the crest is more complex though, isn't it? Then we've got the running number on the side of the cab, nothing wrong with that print whatsoever. And when the warning or danger signs are printed onto plain green surfaces, they do look absolutely fine, which is okay. We've got a few extra little parts picked out down here as well. Yeah, I'm not sure what that little part is. If you know, let me know. We've got the buffer beams separately painted. This has been done reasonably well, actually, not too much paint bleeding here. And around the buffer beams, we've also got the wiring, which is separately painted too. That all looks good. The builder's plate is at the top of the steps. It's a strange place for a builder's plate, isn't it? But yeah, that is just printed on, not separately fitted. An extra one of those would have been nice, but I suppose fitting it around those steps would have been a bit tricky. Right, let's look at the details then, and we'll start at the bottom. Yeah, good looking wheels. Not sure if these are cast or not. I would guess probably so. And yeah, the casting here, or the moulding, whichever it is, looks absolutely fine. That looks very good. And we've got the coupling rods here, which are painted red, of course, and they're nice and fine. Nothing wrong with those. And then we've got brakes here, which are pre-fitted, sanding pipes. These all look absolutely fine. Yeah, this area looks really good. Then we've got the steps, of course, with the separately fitted handrails. Again, the application of these is pretty good. The buffers, unfortunately, are just made of plastic, which, yeah, seems a little bit cheap, given how not cheap the model was. And they're not sprung, which in this case is understandable, because at least if these were sprung in the normal way, that would impinge on the other side of the buffer beam and impact the realism. So yeah, that's fair enough. Again, why this is so expensive, given that it doesn't have that feature, I'm not too sure, but you know, it's only one missing feature. Then of course we've got the lamps, which supposedly work. That is a great justification for the price. Obviously, Hornby's Ruston and quite a few other small shunting locos don't have working lamps. So provided these look good when they do work, that is a cool feature. And this one on the top, I'm not sure if that's going to work or not, because obviously you have to remove that part if you want to get access to the inside of the chassis. So is that one going to work as well? I will be interested to see. Then below this area, we have a separately fitted etched grille. Now that is a really good quality part. Again, this is not something we saw on Hornby's Ruston, and I think this is a massive improvement over that. Yeah, you get a sense of depth, you can kind of see between the grille bars. That looks really, really solid. The rest of the body though is a bit on the basic side. These are not separately fitted or anything. Plus the handles, these are just a part of the moulding. On some premium models, you tend to see these separately fitted where they stand out a little bit better. These, like I say though, are just moulded. The moulding quality is pretty good though. All of these parts look absolutely fine, I would say. And I believe these panels on the top of the bonnet here, I think those might be separately fitted as well. So it's certainly a pretty complex model. Then around the back, of course, we do have this veranda, which is a very American looking feature. Not very many British Shunters had this, but this one did, and it's here where you would access the cab as well. As you can see, we've got the door here, which has got the door handle picked out. And again, round here we've got more lamps. I'll be very interested to see if all of these work. More separately fitted wipers on the windows and window frames as well, which have been picked out. Yeah, they look pretty decent overall. What's also very good is the cab interior. So we do actually have some detail inside here, molded detail and separately fitted parts, and also some decoration. Yeah, for a Heljan cab, this is one of the best. Wasn't sure if we'd get this. Obviously space is quite limited in this model. Would there have been room for proper cab detail? Well, turns out the answer was yes, and that is really, really good to see. Then around the back, here's a look at this buffer beam, very similar. It's got the pipe work on it. Unfortunately, straight out of the box, we do have these gaping holes in the buffer beams, which is strange. You'd think they'd either fit the NEM couplings so that you can use those, or fit those little blanking plugs so that it looks realistic. Instead, they've fitted nothing, which is odd. I would have probably just said fit the NEM couplings. That's what most people do. So if those were fitted, then most people would have to do nothing. Configured like this though, everybody's got to open up that detail bag and fit what they want. It's a bit of a strange choice, that. So yeah, level of detail on the whole pretty good. The only thing it doesn't really have is the sprung buffers, but I think it makes sense that it doesn't have those. So yeah, level of detail, really, really impressed. Quality, less so. Yeah, we've got quite a few inexcusable issues once again from Heljan, and these are things that other manufacturers have solved and moved away from years ago. So it's a real shame that Heljan, even though they are so much more expensive than many other brands, are still lumbered with these issues, and they don't seem to be making any progress towards fixing them, which is a shame. But anyway, that's that. Let's move on. Let's talk about performance. Let's get this onto the track, see how it runs, and also, of course, we'll take a look inside this loco and see what the quality of the mechanism is like. So there she is, Heljan's O2 down onto the track, and she is fully running now, and I'll show you how all of that went in just a second. Up next though, I dismantled this loco to take a look at its mechanism, and that's what I'm going to talk about now. And it's good news. I think Heljan have really taken previous feedback on board with this loco and made massive improvements. Not just to the quality of the mechanism, which they have done, but also to the serviceability of the mechanism, so that you're able to easily keep this loco clean and lubricated for many years. That is really good to see. Before we get to that though, I do want to retract one thing I said earlier on, and it was my compliment about Heljan's instructions being accurate and competent for once. I did give them the benefit of the doubt on the spelling, but there is some misinformation in there, so I do have to give them a slap on the wrist for that after all. So one thing that did seem wrong but turned out to be right, and we'll get into this, was them repeatedly mentioning that there were gears to the rear axle, when a quick look at the loco suggests that both of the axles are geared. Well, that's not quite the case, but we'll get to that in just a second. The other thing is the mention of wiper pickups on all wheels, which again, just from a quick look at the loco, is clearly not the case. So to investigate, I removed the base keeper plate, and we've got screws here, not clips, which is fantastic. And the brake rigging does appear to be in the way, but it's very loosely fitted, and the brake rigging isn't glued to the rest of the chassis, so you can actually get the base keeper off perfectly easily. And this reveals on the one hand that yes, the instructions were correct. There are only gears to one of the axles. It's clear that the chassis was designed for both of the axles to be driven, but only gears to the rear axle have been fitted, which for me is not very professional. You know, not only have they changed their mind on how this loco is going to work after all of the design work and tooling was complete, but they've also had the factory manufacture and fit useless gears that are never going to be used. And because of this design, we've got this large cavity in the die-cast chassis now, which is just empty space. This could have been filled in to make the loco heavier than it is, because, you know, it's not dreadfully heavy. I'm not sure why they would have designed it like this. I mean, obviously this doesn't need both of its axles to be geared. It's a tiny little loco. It's got metal coupling rods. Why would you even go down that route? I'm not sure. As for wiper pickups, nope, clearly this is a split chassis locomotive and it does not pick up through wipers, it picks up through the bearings, not on the wheels but through the axles. So that does of course mean that we do have proper bearings on the driving axles, which is great from Heljan. We don't always see that, and I think this has made a massive difference to this loco. But I do think that wiper pickups would have been better for a small, short wheelbase 040 like this. First of all, because I think wipers are a bit more reliable at the best of times, but second of all, because they're just easier to clean. If there were wipers attached to the base keeper, then you could just remove that and clean the wipers when they get dirty, and that's that. With these bearings, yeah, when they get dirty, what are you going to do? It's much harder. You're going to take the wheels out, try and flush them out. Yeah, it's not the best for an 040. It also, of course, means that the instructions were incorrect about this, which means anybody consulting the instructions before starting the service, which is what you should do, isn't going to find what they expect on the inside. Also, I discovered why the buffer beams don't sit straight. It's because they're screwed onto the body with adjustable screws, so they don't locate properly onto the body. They don't have a fixed position. You'd have to push the buffer beams to and then tighten the screws to make them keep that position. And as we saw earlier on from the angles that the buffer beams were at, that didn't work very well. And there's no locating pips on the buffer beams either, so yeah, the position can be all over the place. You can see though that here is the LED, which is mounted to the chassis, and then there's little light channels which go out to the lamps. That works really, really well. Body removal worked exactly as the instructions described. I didn't know if it would do, didn't know if we could trust the instructions after the issues, but no, this was correct. So 2 screws on the base. The little lamp bracket assembly was a bit of a nuisance to get off. It was a very, very tight fit, but eventually with a knife I was able to pop it off, and luckily I was able to find it because it flew halfway across the room. But with those 3 screws out, the body came off surprisingly easy, which was a pleasant surprise. And here's the die-cast chassis, yeah, reasonably heavy. Obviously most of the body is just plastic. Here's the coreless motor. You can just about see the motor inside there, and there is a flywheel fitted to this as well. That's really nice to see on a loco of this size. As the instructions also promised, here is the pre-fitted speaker. So for sound users, it's going to be quite easy to get this making noise, which is good. And here's the next 18-pin DCC socket. Again, with the body off, that's nice and easy to access. So the cab interior LED is just inside this little hole here, and the light is delivered into the cab via this light channel. Now, I think that explains, as you're going to see, why the cab lighting is so dim. The channels work okay for the lamps because they're not illuminating anything, but if you actually want to light up a space like the inside of the cab, you need the naked LED really. This lighting channel isn't good enough in my opinion, and you'll see that later on, as I say. Anyway, the gauging came in at 14.4mm back to back, which is bang on the standard, so nothing wrong with that. Here is me fitting the NEM coupling. So what I did was I took the NEM coupling out of the NEM pocket. I screwed the NEM pocket in. I don't know if I really needed to do that. It might have been easier if I left the coupling in the pocket, but whatever. You just screw it in and then it springs quite nicely. Nothing wrong with that. However, the little blanking plug that's designed to fit into any buffer beam without a NEM coupling just didn't fit. Yeah, it wasn't even close. I took it off camera later on and tried brute force to get it in. It just wasn't even close to fitting. So I assume what's happened is this was designed to be a tight fit, and possibly during the sampling phase that would have been fine. But then what I think they probably didn't account for was the paint. With the thick red paint on the buffer beams and the red part itself, the tolerances are just messed up and the part will not fit anymore. So again, a little bit unprofessional that. Pity that I wasn't able to fit this piece. Otherwise though, the mechanism itself is pretty good. It's nice and serviceable, it's got quality components. What a nice breath of fresh air that is from Heljan. And believe it or not, that does shine through in the performance. So with that, let me jump back in time and I'll show you how this thing ran. Right, moment of truth then. Tiny O2 shunter with a lot of features on board. How well does it run? Well, let's see if it works at all. First, forwards direction. First bit of power coming now. That's 50% speed. Okay, well, it hasn't been running yet, so it's fair enough if this thing doesn't work ever so well. We'll have a quick thud help? Yes, it will. Okay. So hopefully this thing is going to come to life a bit, and it has done. And actually, that first impression may have been a little bit misleading, because the way this is running is actually really lovely. That seems so beautifully smooth. See if we can get over the express point. Can't quite see the dead zone. But it made it. It didn't stop. So that's pretty good. Very good. What's the gearing like then? This is obviously a shunting locomotive, not an express passenger loco. So 50%. Very good. That's great. That seems sensible. This is actually running really, really nicely. Really nicely. Right. Couple of tests then before I do run this in, and then of course I'll do the testing again. What's the torque like? Is this going to be a powerful shunter? Oh, yep. There we go. Thank goodness we've not got that same old Heljan motor that we always see. I mean, I don't think it would have fitted into this thing, but yeah, this coreless motor is noticeably better than, I forget what motor was on the Ruston by Heljan. But that loco did not run as well as this, so that's good. Right, next test, crawl. Obviously, the slow speed performance is most important in a shunter, so let's have a look at that. Turning up slowly. Oh, bit slower, I think. Yeah, it's going. Bit jerky, not dreadfully consistent. Has it stopped there? No. It did, but it saved itself. My fingers are now away from the controller, just to observe it. I think it might have stopped there, though. Yeah, go on then. Let's give it a bit of a nudge. So yeah, at the moment, not very good. Let's see if we can get it to sustain a crawl at a bit of a higher speed. So, no, not quite. It might just be that it needs to run in and the pickups will improve as it does. It may not be the motor that's stalling at the moment. It may be just losing connection. But yeah, the slow speed performance is disappointing at the moment. Oh, there we go. Up. Yeah, I turned it up to 50 and it died again. But yeah, I think it definitely needs some running in. So with that, 50% forwards. Oh, actually, we need to inspect the lighting, don't we? I will run it in just a moment, but for now, let me pop this on the rolling road and we'll see what the lighting's like. Right, power from the front then. Okay, so we've got one white lamp and one red lamp on both ends, regardless of the direction of travel. So that's what you'd expect from a shunting locomotive. On analog, we don't seem to have any of the other lamps working, so it might be that those are just dummies, unless of course there's some way to enable those on DCC for whatever reason. I suppose you'll already know whether that's true or not because you've seen the mechanism section. But yeah, working lamps, that is very, very cool. Right, let's experiment with the cab lighting then. I've got the magic wand ready, so I'm going to try and figure out the exact location of the switch. It doesn't look like the cab light is on by default, so let's see if I can get it to switch on. Over the cab, maybe? I mean, nothing's happening. I don't actually remember where the instructions said the switch was, if they did say it all. I suppose it could be working, but I'm just not seeing it. Maybe it's super dim or something. So what I might try and do is reposition the camera, see if I can actually get eyes on the LED itself. Oh god, it is on, isn't it? It's just the world's dimmest LED. Right, so where was the switch then? Right. Nothing I'm doing. Oh, there it is. Yeah, okay. So it's over this little toolbox. Well, fuel area. Fuel tank. There we go, got it. On the left-hand side. Or on the right-hand side. Okay. or you can do it sort of in the middle here. So it's anywhere in this rough kind of area in front of the cab. Oh, it's not doing it now. Oh, here it is. Yeah, if you keep trying, it should eventually go now. Let me switch off some of my lights and figure out just how dim this LED is. So, yeah, the cab light's on currently, and I can just about detect the slightest glow of light on some of the controls in there. The camera just can't though. So I would say that LED is too dim to actually be of any use. I know these lights weren't dreadfully bright in real life, but unless you sort of get your face down below the level of the loco and actually see the light itself switched on, yeah, I don't think there's really any point of having the LED in there. It's not really adding anything to the model, at least in my opinion. Perhaps if you were to fit some crew figures, it might illuminate those slightly, but for my money, it's a bit dim. You can't notice it. If I didn't know the light was there, if I hadn't just been looking for it, I would have missed it. So yeah, not great. The lamp's fine. This lighting, far too dim. Right, okay. Finally then, let's do that running in. Back onto the track without the rolling road. Let's see how she gets on around the track. Simple loco, simple wheelbase. Not expecting any issues here. Here we go. Alright, yeah, very sensibly geared. I've seen many locos of this size truly race along at 50% speed. This one's really not doing that, which makes it very suitable as a shunter, I think. Also, yeah, as predicted, no issues whatsoever around those second radius curves. Maintaining a constant speed. We've already seen there's plenty of torque in this loco as well, so I suspect even when I couple this up to a load, it's not going to struggle around those curves, which is so good to see. Compared with that Heljan Ruston I looked at, which was just totally useless along the track, this is worlds better. So yeah, performance-wise, I'm very impressed. There is room for improvement, of course, down at the slow end. I've seen shunters perform better than this at a crawl, and of course this really just needs to match every other 040 shunter that I've owned before, because this is more expensive than I think all of them, possibly even including steam locos. So yeah, performance, no room for this to be any lesser than any of my other 040s, but hopefully running in will improve it. So I'll leave this to run 30 minutes in either direction, and then I'll be back. Alright, see you in a second, folks. Alright folks, that is running in complete, and yeah, I'm probably happy to pronounce it. This is the best Heljan diesel shunter I've ever seen. It's better than the 07, it's better than the Teddy Bear, the Class 14, and it's better actually than a lot of the larger Heljan diesels as well. Better than the 1361 to name a steam loco. Yeah, it's amazing what a good mechanism can do. This is powerful, it's not struggling, it hasn't cut out on the points. For a small loco like this with such a short wheelbase, that is impressive, but I think the flywheel really is to blame or to thank for that. Watch this, if I cut it off, cut, it doesn't just stop dead, there is a second where it continues to move because of that flywheel, and I think that carries it over the express points quite nicely. Now, obviously, that cutout might cause you trouble on DCC, and in the instructions they do suggest fitting a stay alive if you are to chip this loco. Whether there's room for a stay alive capacitor inside here, I'm not sure. Possibly, but it certainly wouldn't be a large one, but I think it would be enough to get you over insulated points. But here on analog, where there's no DCC decoder to keep alive, it's fine. It may stop at the slower speeds, but at any sort of operating speed it seems fine. So yeah, it's beautifully smooth, nice and quiet. You can tell that this has a better quality mechanism than a lot of Heljan's other stuff, and I hope this is something they continue to do. You know, they've charged the money, why not fit quality mechanisms, I think. Oops, that was my light gone. Hang on. Yeah, as I was saying, I think it's going to do them good from a PR point of view, you know. Nothing wrong with giving people what they pay for. Anyway, how about the slow speed then? Now that this is running, is this any better at the crawl? Let's have a look. So what I've done is I've cleaned this track. I've taken the track rubber, I have scrubbed it clean to give this loco the best possible chance of running well, because I didn't want the cutting out to have been caused by dirty track. So let's turn this up very gradually. Oop. So as you can see, that seems to be about as slow as this can go. And yes, it's cut out. So I think the wiper pickups might have been slightly better. It's not unreliable at the higher speeds though, which is weird. It's just at the low speeds like this it seems to struggle. And yeah, it does seem to be cutting out. Maybe it's stalling. In fact, it could be, because I can feel it vibrating when I put my finger there. If I cut power, does it still do that? No. So it could be the motor then. Yeah, it might not be the pickups then. I'm not actually certain. See if I can replicate that. Yeah, it's the motor, it's got power. So yeah, I apologise then, the pickups probably seem to be alright. I can't guarantee that it's not them to blame every single time, but yeah. Seems to be when it's crawling and it stalls, it is because of the motor. So yeah, perhaps the motor's a bit weak for this sort of thing. I guess actually that would explain why this isn't cutting out at the higher speeds. I suppose if it was the pickups then it would be doing, wouldn't it? But having said that, at these sorts of speeds, it seems to be a lot smoother. And it's certainly not cutting out. I wonder if it'll do that speed over the point. There's the dead zone now. Oh yeah. Okay. And yeah, it looks as though both wheels there are on the dead zone, so it's kind of inevitable that this loco is going to stop at a crawl. At the higher speeds, of course, the flywheel kicks in and stops it from cutting out. You still in focus there? Yeah, I think so. So that raises the question, how slow can I go over the Hornby Express point without this stopping? So there's a slightly slower speed. Yeah, you see it got away with it there. It's got a bit slower. There we go. So it's about there. It's actually not bad. I mean, in an ideal world, every loco would fly over these points without stopping. Well, not fly over. All right, crawl over them then without stopping. But that's just kind of impossible without a stay alive. So I'm not going to criticize this thing for not achieving the impossible, because that's insane. But the point is, at the higher speeds, this is going to do it. And it doesn't even have to be going that quick. I mean, that's not bad. So on the whole, I would say this is performing better than many 040s with this kind of wheel base at the slow speeds. And I think the flywheel is what's helping it. Right, very nice. So let's talk about tractive effort then. Let me move you back. So this came in at 0.16 newtons, which is about 13 coaches on straight and level track. That is not bad, actually, and that is more than other locos that I've got, which were heavier than this. So that tells me that the wheels on this loco must be pretty grippy, because, yeah, that tractive effort is a lot more than I would have expected given the weight of this. But I'm not going to go too crazy with this. We've seen that the torque's really good, so it's not as though it's going to struggle because of no motor power, because that's really good. So I've just set up my rake of low-sided BR wagons with a wacky brake van on the back, and we'll test the coupling and see how all of this works. So let's back her up and see how gradually I can do this. Right, how slow can I go? I have to say, it is a pity though that the most expensive 040 shunter I've ever bought is not the best performing 040 shunter I've ever bought. I mean, if you think about the much cheaper Dapol Hawthorne Leslie, that really could crawl better than this, regardless of the reason, really. But anyway, the coupling, oh, look at that. Heljan making functional couplings now, eh? Going up in the world. Well, yeah, can't fault that. That's perfect. Right, how does she get on with a load then? Well, let's find out. I'm going to go for about 40, I think. So I don't want it to stop on the points, but I don't want it to go too fast. Let's go for 35, that looks good. So see which other shunters you can spot today. I will give you the names of a few that I'm running. So here on the middle line, we have the Bachmann 03 shunter, which is a heavier loco, and it's £20 cheaper. But this one doesn't have the working lights. Well, it does, but it doesn't have the working lamps, I should say. The cab interior lighting is much better than Heljan's because it's brighter. Plus you've got crew figures pre-fitted in this loco, which are illuminated by the cab lights. So it's a bit more sensible, and I think the mechanism's a bit more competent in this one as well. It's certainly the better runner. And it's cheaper too, but it's not quite as detailed. I think Heljan have it where the detail's concerned. And then on the inside line, we have another of the locos that I've mentioned a couple of times today. That is the Hornby Ruston. And I have to say, the 88DS, that is. And I have to say, Heljan have this loco beat. Yes, Heljan's model is more expensive than this one for a reason. This is heavier, and it beats Heljan on that, but Heljan's is better when it comes to the detail, and dare I even say it, when it comes to the mechanism as well. I think the wiper pickups serve the Ruston better than the bearing pickups serve the Heljan 02, but apart from that, the Heljan is superior. It's a much better design, I think. And case in point, this loco's cut out. There we go. Right, let's catch up with the Heljan 02, and it's cut out again. Goodness me, I think it needs to warm up. All right, rounding the first bend with a load, and I suspect this is going to be fine. Like I said earlier on, the torque's great. Didn't show any signs of weakness before, so let's just see. Second radius, no slowing down. So yeah, that's the coreless motor for you. Nice and efficient, maintaining a nice constant speed around the track. So do you know what? I'm going to say it. I think all things considered, I like this loco. Yes, I actually really do like this loco. I don't like it much up close because I admit I am quite irritated by the poor quality of the die casting and the fact that the BR crest doesn't look very good and the wobbly handrails and such. But on the whole, taking a step back, this is a really cool, tiny little shunter. It's an interesting prototype. It runs really well, and it's not so badly manufactured that that fact is obvious from any sort of distance, so that you can't enjoy the model. I actually do find this really enjoyable. It's very, very good news that this doesn't constantly stop on all of the points. That's something that Heljan's Ruston shunter did, and that just totally ruined that loco. For me, that was an unusable model, more or less. This one doesn't do that. It's much more reliable, and it's got 2 less wheels as well. That means 2 less wheels picking up power. So by all accounts, this loco should be the least reliable of the two. If you've got an 040 and an 060, the 040 should always be worse than the 060. But it's not, it's better, and I think that's because it's got a superior mechanism. So I think the mechanism saved this Heljan loco. I think given the quality issues, if I'd opened this up and found a poor quality mechanism again, or if I'd found when I tested this that this loco didn't work properly, then this would have been another very scathing Heljan review. But I think because this is built properly on the inside, it's gone from a slightly poor quality locomotive on the outside to an overall enjoyable loco, which is perhaps a little overpriced if anything, but otherwise a pretty good job. So yeah, a surprise outcome, an enjoyable loco, and one that works surprisingly well. Let's have some ratings then for Heljan's brand new Class 02 shunter. And yeah, right off the bat, this model is not perfect. There are some things about it that I think really should and could have been better. But on the whole, I am pleasantly surprised. This is a much better model, I would say, than quite a few of the Heljan locos I've looked at in the past. Not least because of the level of detail, which I've given 4.5 stars. So, amazing level of detail here. We've got etched plates provided, at least some of them, which is great. Etched grills as well. We've got lighting, so interior cab lighting, that's not very effective, but it's there. Working lamps as well. Painted cab detail, which is really impressive to see, and loads of separate details as well. It doesn't get the full 5-star because I don't think the decoration is the greatest in the world. Yeah, that BR crest really doesn't look very good compared with what Bachmann can do, and it's got no sprung buffers, which I know doesn't matter very much. But on this occasion, I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt on the sprung buffers, because to make them sprung would have, I think, made the model even less realistic. So probably a fair decision that. Overall, really, really good level of detail. The performance, really pleasingly, is excellent. The Loco's got plenty of torque, no sign of being underpowered this time, which is great. It runs perfectly smoothly at very sensible speeds as well. It does just struggle to crawl, which is a real pity for a shunter. It seems to cut out quite a bit, struggling to maintain a run. But otherwise, yeah, it's a great performer, except at the very slowest speeds. And of course, if you were to fit this with DCC and include a stay alive capacitor, I suspect you would get a much better performance out of this. Pulling power then is great. The Loco isn't dreadfully heavy. It's 120 grams, which is less than the Bachmann 03 shunter, and it's 6 grams less than the Ruston 88DS. Yet pulling power wise, 0.16 newtons, that's the same as the Bachmann 03, and it's slightly more than the Ruston, so it must have very grippy wheels. It's an excellent hauler, very impressed with that. Mechanism for a Heljan locomotive, I'm very pleased to say, deserves 4.5 star. It's great. It's very sensible, it's even serviceable. You can get the body off without an absolute nightmare. That's a bonus for a Heljan loco. You can access the axles if you want to, and the gears, without having to sort of destroy clips to get the base keeper off. I hate all of that nonsense. Yeah, this is a very well designed chassis from a serviceability point of view. It's also got proper separate bearings, which we don't always see from Heljan, so I like that a lot. Good quality motor, which we don't always see from Heljan, so I like that a lot. Good quality coreless motor with a flywheel, that's great to see, and it performs very nicely. It's got a nice modern DCC socket, all the lighting on board of course, pre-fitted speaker even. Yeah, it's a really, really good mechanism. It doesn't get 5 because of the gear issue. It's a real shame that they didn't just design this thing to be driven with a single axle from the get-go, so that the rest of the chassis could have been filled in, making the Loco heavier and removing the need for that second gear to be manufactured and fitted to the axle. That would have made the underside of the Loco more realistic. It would have meant that we needed less holes in the base keeper plate. It just seems a bit unprofessional that we've got so much design going into a second driven axle and that hasn't been put to any use. So yeah, bizarre. I do think though that the single axle drive is better than double axle drive. Double axle drive, totally unnecessary on a Loco like this. The quality though is a little bit on the poor side, I would say. I've given it half marks, 2.5 star. Now, I've certainly seen worse from Heljan. That Heljan Ruston was much, much worse than this. But there are still a few issues on this model. Like I've already mentioned, the print work in places, mainly the crest, that's falling behind other manufacturers. The quality of the die casting on the running plate, very poor indeed. I don't know why Heljan are still unable to solve this issue. We've also got the problem of the buffer beams not sitting straight. I think that's because of the way they're fixed to the body using adjustable screws for some reason, meaning they don't have an absolute position. Why you would do that, I don't know. Also, while most of the handrails are fine, the big rear plastic handrail really isn't fine. It doesn't sit straight, it's wobbly, it's bent. A better quality part there, I think, is essential for the quality of the model. But yeah, otherwise it's okay. The rest of the decoration's good, and the way that all of the tiny little parts have been applied is fantastic. So yeah, not all bad. I suppose it's the weakest area though. Value for money then, so this is a tricky area. This model is extremely expensive. So the RRP of £169, that is the same as the RRP of your typical massive Acura scale diesel, like the Deltic for example. This model is nowhere near the same level of quality as your typical Acura scale Loco, and yes, it's got the lights and the pre-fitted speaker and such, but so do those Acura scale Locos. This is obviously sort of a fraction of the size and weight of one of those Locos, and because of how small it is, it's so much simpler. It's not worth that in my opinion. Obviously though, because you can get Heljan Locos at a discount and you can't get Acura scale Locos at a discount, at the retailers paying about £143.65 is obviously slightly better for a Loco like this. And while I don't think the Loco is quite worth that, unfortunately, because of the quality issues and because that is still the price of a large tender Loco or a larger diesel and not a tiny little shunter, But I also have to say this does pack in quite a lot. Compared with other 040 diesel shunters like the ones from Hornby I mentioned, this does have a lot more features. It's got the speaker, it's got the flywheel, it's got the lights. It does have a lot more going for it than the cheaper Hornby shunters do. So yeah, I think the higher price does kind of reflect the model, which is nice to see, but I'm not quite convinced it's worth what it costs, and I'm almost entirely certain that we will see these models come down in price if certain examples don't sell out in a reasonable amount of time. So keep an eye on these. Anyway, middle of the road for value, I've given it 3-star. So overall then, that is 7.61 out of 10, or a grade of C, which is pretty good for Heljan, I would say. This would have easily gotten a higher grade though if the quality was just a little bit better, or perhaps if the price was a bit more reasonable as well, or both. That would have been good. Anyway, into the logbook this goes, and it is 7th place, just above EFE Rails Class 144 and below Hornby's A3. Alright then folks, well that will just about do it for this review. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Yeah, this was unexpectedly fun. I really enjoyed looking at this loco. In terms of buying one then, unless you're absolutely desperate for one, I think I would recommend just holding off and waiting to see if the prices come down. Because all things considered, I think really this ought to cost about the same as the other shunters that I've mentioned in today's video. You know, about £20 less than it does. This is more complicated than some of them, to be fair. It's got the lighting, it's got more features, but then the build quality is noticeably poorer than the likes of Bachmann's 03 and Hornby's Ruston. So I think all in all it evens out, and this should cost about the same. And do you know what? With so many Heljan locos, that does end up happening. They do end up having to reduce these models by quite a bit in order to get the last ones to shift. That may not happen with these. If it turns out they're super popular, they may sell out. You know, maybe they didn't make as many of these, and so that won't happen. I'm not guaranteeing that will happen, but I'd be surprised if it didn't. We'll say that. So unless you're desperate for one of these, I would say hold off. See what happens, and if they start selling out and it doesn't look as though that's going to happen, then maybe that's the time to pick one up. But yeah, overall, generally a good job, a great runner, an okay looking loco. I'm pretty pleased with this. So thank you so much for watching. Comment down below, let me know what you think about this. Have I been too harsh? Have I not been harsh enough? Please do share that with me. But for now, if you're interested in this, check out the affiliate links down in the description. And I'll say once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next review. Alright, cheers folks, you take care.